There's a certain kind of fear that doesn't arrive all at once. It builds slowly through details you don't think twice about. I didn't understand that feeling until I lived in a rented house with my college roommate, Jason. Even now, years later, I still can't fully explain what happened. Jason and I weren't close friends in the way people usually imagine roommates to be. We got along, shared a few classes back in college, and it just made sense to split rent after we graduated. We found a small house not far from campus. It was cheap enough to afford, old enough to raise a few concerns we both ignored. For the first year, nothing stood out. Life was ordinary. Work, rent, groceries, small conversations in the kitchen, and long stretches of silence where we each stayed in our rooms. It wasn't exciting, but it was stable, predictable, safe enough. We even renewed the lease without hesitation. At the time, it felt like the easiest decision we could make. Looking back, that might have been the point where things stopped being as simple as they seemed, because a couple of months after that, the strange things started happening. It began on a night in June. I came home late from work, exhausted in that dull way where even opening a door feels like effort. Jason was already home. We met briefly in the kitchen, exchanged a few words about work. Nothing meaningful. After that, we went to our rooms. Around 3 a.m., I woke up. That's when I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, measured. Like someone was moving carefully through the house, trying not to be noticed. The sound moved from one end of the hallway toward the living room. My first assumption was Jason. It was the simplest explanation. Maybe he couldn't sleep. Maybe he was getting water. So I stayed still, listening, expecting the sound to fade back into normality. Eventually it stopped. I fell asleep not long after, telling myself it meant nothing. The next morning, Jason and I crossed paths in the hallway. He looked more tired than usual. Before I could even speak, he asked me something that immediately made me stop. He asked if I had been walking around the house at 3 a.m. At first I laughed, thinking he was half asleep and joking. But his expression didn't change. He wasn't smiling. He looked uneasy, like he was trying to confirm something he didn't want to believe. I told him I'd been asleep. Then I asked why he thought it was me. He said he heard footsteps coming from my side of the house. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Eventually, we both tried to rationalize it. It sounded reasonable enough. But a few nights later, it happened again. Same time. 3 a.m. I woke up before I fully understood why. The footsteps were already there, moving through the hallway. Slow, deliberate, familiar in the worst way. This time I stayed awake and listened carefully. After a minute I got up and checked. The hallway was empty. The living room was empty. Nothing disturbed. Nothing out of place. That was the part that unsettled me most. After that, sleep stopped feeling normal. Jason and I talked about it again the next morning, but this time he seemed confused. He said he hadn't heard anything. Not that night. That was the first real change between us. And from that point on, the house stopped feeling empty when it should have been. It started feeling occupied. A few days later, I came home late from work and noticed Jason sitting in his room. The door was open. He was on his bed facing the corner of the room. He wasn't on his phone, he wasn't watching anything, just sitting still. I called his name once. No response. I assumed he was tired or distracted and went to the kitchen. When I came back down the hallway, his room was darker. The light was off now, but he was still sitting in the exact same position. I called again, louder. Still nothing. Something about it made me stop in the hallway. Not fear exactly, more like instinct telling me not to push further. I went to my room instead. An hour later, I heard the footsteps again. But this time, they stopped right outside my door. Then there was a faint scraping sound stopping just beneath my door. I froze. My phone was already in my hand, and I texted Jason immediately. Are you walking around? The reply didn't come right away. When it did, it was just a question mark. Then another message followed. I'm not home. I stared at the door. The hallway was silent again. I opened my door slowly, but Jason's bedroom door was open. I was almost certain it had been closed earlier. I walked toward it, each step heavier than the last. The room was dark and quiet. At first, it looked empty. Then I saw someone sitting in the center of it. A man. Not Jason. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard. He sat completely still, facing me directly. For a moment, neither of us moved. It felt like the entire house had narrowed down to that single point in space. Then I stepped back and ran. I didn't stop until I was outside. I stood across the street, watching my own front door in the dark, waiting for a shadow to move. When we finally gathered the courage to search the house later, we found nothing. No forced entry, no signs of a struggle, just a silent, empty house that felt like it was keeping a secret. Only a back window that hadn't been fully secured. After that night, everything that had felt confusing suddenly became something else entirely. Someone had been inside the house while we slept. But what still scares me to this day is the timing. Jason wasn't home that night. He had left unexpectedly to meet a friend, which means the only reason I saw him was because I came home early. I've lived with other people before, and most of those experiences have blurred together over time. Different apartments, different roommates, different routines that eventually fade into memory. But there's one place I never really moved past. Not because something dramatic happened immediately, but because of how normal everything felt right up until the moment it didn't. It started with a house I didn't really think twice about choosing. It was one of those post-college situations where the decision is mostly based on price, availability, and convenience, rather than anything else. At first, there were 4 of us living there. By the end, it was just me and one roommate. I slowly realized I didn't actually understand at all. The house was on the outskirts of town, far enough that things felt quieter than they should have at night. Behind the property, a line of trees ran close to the edge of the yard, thick enough that during the day it looked harmless, but at night felt like the stuff of nightmares. For the first few months, nothing about it stood out. Life was exactly what you'd expect from shared housing. Someone cooking at odd hours, dishes left in the sink longer than they should have been, minor annoyances that felt important in the moment, but meaningless in hindsight. We weren't close, not really. Just familiar enough from university to make living together feel safe enough to try. It worked for a while. Then around the 9th month, things changed quietly. One week there were 4 of us. The next, it was just me and Evan. Evan was the one I knew the least. He wasn't unfriendly, but he wasn't present in any meaningful way either. He worked mornings, left early, and returned late. Most of the time, he stayed in his room. No music, no television, no background noise that would indicate life happening behind the door. At first, I preferred it that way. But after the others left, the house stopped feeling empty in a comfortable way. It started feeling incomplete. There were patterns I noticed without meaning to. Evan always left at nearly the same time each morning. He always came back late at night. And when he returned, he moved differently than most people do in their own home. Careful, quiet, controlled. Like he was trying not to be noticed, even in a place he was supposed to belong. I told myself it didn't matter. People are private. People have routines. Not everything needs an explanation. But that changed one night. It was around 1 a.m. I was still awake, lying in bed, scrolling without really paying attention. That's when I saw headlights sweep across my window as a car pulled into the driveway. It was Evan. I heard the front door open, then close. But instead of the usual quiet movement toward his room, He was moving with such intensity that it was hard to ignore. I sat up. Before I could think better of it, I opened my door slightly and looked into the hallway. The lights were off, but I could still see him near his bedroom door. He was completely still. I called out quietly, "Hey, everything okay?" For a moment he didn't respond. Then he turned his head slightly toward me. "I'm fine," he said. Then he went into his room and closed the door. I stayed in the hallway longer than I needed to, waiting for something else. Eventually I went back to my room, but I didn't feel settled. A few minutes later, I started hearing movement from behind his door. The rhythm wasn't organized. It felt like someone searching for something they couldn't afford to lose. I found myself stepping closer to the hallway without really deciding to. The sound pulled attention in a way that didn't feel voluntary. And then, just as I reached his door, it stopped. Before I could step back, the door opened. Evan stood there again. He looked at me for a second, then asked, "Why are you up?" I hesitated, said I was going to the kitchen. He stared at me a moment longer than felt natural, then closed the door again. After that night, things changed. Evan became more withdrawn. It was almost like he was sneaking in and out of the house. We stopped having conversations altogether, not because of conflict, but because interactions simply stopped happening naturally. And every time I saw him, he looked the same. Without realizing it, I started adjusting my sleep around him, staying awake until I heard him come back, just so I knew where he was before I tried to rest. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. Then one night, he knocked on my door. When I opened it, he stood in the hallway. "Hey," he said. "Sorry to bother you." He told me he thought he had dropped his wallet somewhere outside and couldn't find it. He asked if I had a flashlight and if I could help him look. It sounded reasonable, the kind of thing roommates do without thinking. But nothing about him felt simple anymore. Still, I agreed. So I grabbed a flashlight and followed him outside. He talked as we went. Casual questions about work, the weather, ordinary things that didn't feel fully natural, like he was filling silence rather than participating in conversation. That's when I noticed his car. It was parked farther down the driveway than usual, closer to the trees than I remembered. We walked past it. That was the first moment something felt off in a way I couldn't ignore. "Are you sure it's not closer to the house?" I asked. He said he thought he might have gone further earlier. His tone didn't change, but the answer felt too prepared. We reached the edge of the driveway. Nothing there. No wallet, no sign of anything dropped. I stopped. "Maybe we should head back," I said. He paused, then he pointed toward a narrow break in the trees. It might be that way. It wasn't a path, just a slight opening where branches didn't fully meet. The kind of gap that looked accidental rather than used. I didn't like it. "I think I'm just going to head back," I said. "I've got work early." I stepped back slightly. That's when his expression changed into something I didn't recognize. Blank, cold, and utterly still. We stood there in silence. Then I turned and walked away. At first I walked fast, then faster. I could feel the space behind me even without looking. When I finally did glance back, he wasn't following. He was still standing near the trees. I didn't sleep that night. I packed quietly, moving carefully through the house, trying not to make sound carry. Every small noise felt amplified. At one point I thought I heard movement outside, but I didn't check. By morning I was gone. I left before he returned, and I never saw Evan again. I never got answers. No explanation. Nothing that would make any of it fit into something understandable. But even now, I still think about it. Not because of what might have been out there in the trees, but because of how easy it was to live beside someone and still have no real idea who they were when it mattered. Some people come into your life through coincidence, slipping in so naturally that you never think to question it. Others arrive through connections you don't examine closely, because at the time everything feels harmless enough. And then there are the ones who use that connection to get just close enough, before you realize you made a mistake letting them in at all. I didn't meet my roommate through a listing or some random arrangement. She was family, or at least that's what I was told. And honestly, that detail alone is probably the reason I didn't question anything sooner. Looking back now, that blind trust feels like the first real mistake. This happened back in 2015, when I was 23 and living on my own for the first time. My apartment wasn't anything impressive, just a small 2-bedroom place with a single bathroom, but it was mine. That mattered more than anything. The problem was the rent. After a couple of months, it started feeling heavier than I expected, and I figured getting a roommate would help ease the pressure. Around that time, my aunt reached out to me about someone named Leah. She said Leah was a distant cousin from a side of the family I didn't really know well. Apparently, she was moving to the area for school and needed a place to stay. My aunt vouched for her completely. Quiet, responsible, focused. And for some reason, that was enough for me. I didn't ask questions, I didn't verify anything, I just agreed. Looking back, I can't even remember pausing to think it through. It all felt too smooth, like the decision had already been made for me. Leah moved in about a week later. The first thing I noticed was how misplaced she felt in the space. Not in any obvious way, nothing I could immediately point to, but something about her presence didn't match the situation. Most people moving into a new place carry some kind of energy with them. Curiosity, nervousness, adjustment. She didn't. She was polite. She introduced herself properly. She thanked me for letting her stay. But there was a distance in her expression, like she was only partially present. Physically there, but mentally somewhere else entirely. I told myself that was just her personality. Not everyone is expressive. Not everyone settles in the same way. The first few days passed quietly. I had work, she supposedly had classes, and our schedules barely overlapped. It almost felt like I was living alone again, just with the technical presence of another person in the background. That feeling lasted until the 5th night. I came home around 10 p.m., tired, not really paying attention to anything unusual. But the moment I stepped inside, I heard movement. Fast footsteps in the hallway, retreating quickly, followed by a door shutting harder than it needed to. I froze. Then I walked down the hallway slowly. Leah's door was closed, her light on. But my door was open. I stopped there. I knew I had closed it before leaving. That wasn't something I forgot. For a few seconds, I just stood in the hallway staring at the gap, trying to convince myself it didn't mean anything. When I finally went inside, everything looked normal. Nothing missing, nothing disturbed. But the feeling didn't go away. It stayed lodged somewhere behind my thoughts. I closed the door again and stayed in my room for the rest of the night. About an hour later, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when my eyes drifted towards the bottom of the door. A shadow. Someone was standing outside, completely still. I stared at it, trying to figure out how long it had been there. My voice came out quieter than I expected. Leah. No response. The shadow didn't move. Do you need something? I asked again, louder. Still nothing. Then slowly, too slowly, the shadow shifted and disappeared. A second later, I heard her door close. That was the first moment something settled in my chest that I couldn't ignore. Not full fear yet, but something close enough to change how the house felt. The next morning, I asked her about it casually. I didn't want to sound accusatory. I asked if she had needed anything the night before, or if she had come near my room. She smiled. Not awkwardly. Not nervously. Just a calm, empty smile that didn't answer anything. She said everything was fine, then left like the conversation hadn't happened at all. That should have been the moment I pushed further. But I didn't. I kept falling back on the same excuse. She was family. The next night, I came home even later, around 10:30. The apartment was dark and silent, like no one was inside. I assumed she had gone to bed, so I moved quietly and went straight to my room. After a call with a friend, I decided to shower before sleeping. While I was in the bathroom, I thought I heard something outside. Movement, faint and unclear. I turned the water down, listening. Then, nothing. When I stepped out, I noticed my door immediately. I was sure I had closed it, almost certain I had locked it. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have, then slowly stepped into the hallway. Leah's door was closed. Everything else looked normal. That was the problem. Everything looked too normal. I went back into my room, closed the door again, and locked it. But the feeling stayed. Persistent. Hard to ignore even when I tried. I stayed up later than usual, forcing myself to focus on anything else until exhaustion finally pulled me under. I don't know how long I slept before I woke up, but something felt wrong. Then I saw my door was slightly open. I was alarmed. I hadn't touched it, and I certainly hadn't heard it. I sat up slowly. "Leah," I whispered. She didn't respond, and then I saw her. She was standing in the corner of my room near the wardrobe. For a moment, I couldn't move. My mind refused to fully process what I was seeing. She didn't look right. Not in any dramatic way, just wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Her expression gave nothing away. Then she took slow, measured steps. And then she ran. Straight past me, out of the room, her footsteps hard against the floor. Her door slammed shut seconds later. That was it. I got up, grabbed my phone and keys, and left. I didn't think. I didn't wait. I just needed distance. From a few streets away, I called a few friends and stayed in my car. When they checked the apartment, she was gone. Most of her belongings were missing. What remained looked wrong. Half-packed items, impersonal things, like someone had never truly settled in at all. It felt like she had been preparing to leave the entire time. After that, I tried to find answers. When I reached out to my family, the confusion only grew. They claimed the Leah I described didn't exist in our family tree. It made me realize that I hadn't just let a stranger into my home. I had invited something that knew exactly how to look like someone I should trust. Leah was gone, and any proof of her presence seemed to vanish with her. I moved out within the month. I didn't stay long enough to chase explanations I wouldn't find anyway, because the more I replayed everything, the less it felt like coincidence, and the more it felt like something had been carefully placed into my life, already knowing exactly how I would react. Leah never behaved like someone adjusting to a new home. She didn't behave like family. She behaved like someone who already knew the space. And what still stays with me most isn't the silence, or the shadow, or even the night I saw her in my room. It's the way she looked there, completely at ease, like she belonged, and like I didn't. And that brings us to the end of today's video. Which of these stories gave you quite a fright? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Deep Horror for more unsettling stories like this.